We don't have to look back too far to find a time when our places of work were very different from those of today. A time before mechanization, when labour forces were large and most tasks were accomplished by hand. From hop picking amid the countryside of Kent in the 1930s to the construction of gliders in Newbury and truck building at Basingstoke. We begin our look back at employment in the past with a very brief glimpse of the art of lace making in Winchelsea, East Sussex. These clips were recorded in the 1920s as part of a film portrait of artist Harry Furness as he set about drawing scenes of his local area. Charcoal burning was an important industry in various parts of the region. The charcoal itself had several uses, including the smelting of iron, until coke took over. Charcoal is also a key ingredient of gunpowder. Making the stuff was no easy matter, however. It required skill and experience, chiefly because it was essential to keep unwanted air out of the stack during the burning process. After carefully forming a structure with cut branches and split wood, the charcoal burner was ready to add a layer of brushwood or straw as insulation. Next came a layer of soil to finish off the job. In some cases, turf was used. Screens would sometimes be erected around the perimeter of the working area to prevent sparks from setting light to surrounding woodland. By the time these pictures were recorded in the late 1920s, the traditional method of production was a rarity. But during the 16th century, it was so common that a temporary ban was enforced because trees were needed for shipbuilding. Charcoal burners often lived alongside the burning site, in huts they constructed from oak poles with a covering of turf. Furniture might consist of sacks stuffed with dry beech leaves, while cooking was achieved with a couple of pots over an open fire. This way they were always on hand to keep an eye on the process as it slowly progressed, occasionally raking off the sticks of charcoal. And so, with the burning underway, there was little to do but shelter from the sun and wait. Kent, the Garden of England, is renowned for its connections with the growing of hops. Every year, large parties, including whole families, would migrate to the various hop farms once found in the county to assist in harvesting. These scenes were captured in the 1930s, a busy period for the trade. But the real heyday had occurred during the latter part of the previous century, when there were an estimated 70,000 acres of hops under cultivation, mainly in Kent. Away from the fields, the labour force was housed in makeshift accommodation, very basic, with minimal space and virtually no facilities. houses became a familiar landmark of the Kent countryside, built to contain the oasts or kilns used to dry the hops. Hops, or Humulus lupulus, to give them their proper name, are a close relation to cannabis. They'd been grown in Europe since the 14th century and used extensively in the brewing trade to help preserve beer. The flower of the plant also contains oils, which added a distinct taste and smell to continental brews. Beer had long been brewed in this country, of course, but without hops it didn't keep, and production was restricted to small quantities only. But in the 1570s, the first hop garden was planted at Yalding, and English brewers were soon making use of the crop as an addition to their recipes. This not only improved the taste, but made brewing on a large scale possible. By the 1920s, breweries owned their own farms, each growing vines trained over a framework of trellis supported by wires and poles. Perhaps surprisingly, even in the 1930s, sprays were used to help enhance the yield. Unfortunately, within 3 decades, this long-established industry was in serious decline, unable to compete with competition from overseas. But in 1932, it was a different story. The crop from this harvest might well have been bound for use in Portsmouth. Brewing has now come to an end in the city, but in the early 1930s, Long's of Southsea was just one of a number of breweries in the Portsmouth area. By this time, the production of beer was already a science, with laboratory tests ensuring consistency and quality of each brew. The first job in processing the malted barley was the cleaning and screening of all the foreign bodies from the harvest field. The barley was then crushed in the mill, and afterwards left to stand for 2 hours and sprayed to form a mash. The next step was to draw off the resulting hot liquor, which carried with it the essential rich foods and flavor of the malt, with samples taken for testing en route. The malt extract, or wort, was then run into huge copper boilers and the hops added. Here the mixture was boiled until the full flavor of the hops was extracted. The heat was supplied by a coal-fired furnace below. The next stage of the process was to run off the wort from the coppers. After this, the temperature of the liquid was reduced by passing it over a refrigerated cooler, whilst purified air, pumped by a special processor, was circulated within the chambers. In the tun room, things really began to develop. Here, liquid entered as wort, but left as beer. As the delicate process of fermentation began, yeast was added and the temperature monitored. With purified air discharged from above, the fermentation continued for 6 days. A tour of the brewery was always a popular interlude, and tenants were welcome to witness the national beverage being produced. Meanwhile, in another part of the brewery, as the beer was being perfected, a team of coopers were at work in the repair shops, whilst others ensured the pipes and barrels were hygienically clean. A year or 2 after this film was made, the brewery supplied Jubilee Brew at 6p a bottle in celebration of George V's 25-year reign, and in 1937, Coronation Brew, when George VI took to the throne. But in 1941, the building on the corner of Hambrook Street and Cecil Place suffered a direct hit during the Blitz.